The Lakota war party emerged from the morning mist like spirits given flesh, their painted ponies moving in perfect silence across the Montana grasslands. I watched them approach my trading post from behind the crude wooden counter where I'd been tallying the week's meager profits, my hand instinctively moving to the Winchester rifle that hung on the wall behind me. But these weren't raiders coming for blood and plunder. At their head rode Chief Standing Bear, a man whose reputation for both wisdom and ferocity had spread across 3 territories. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, yet his dark eyes held the depth of someone who had learned that true strength sometimes lay in restraint rather than violence. My name is Thomas McKenna, and I'd been running this isolated trading post for 5 years, serving as a bridge between the white settlements and the various tribes that still roamed these lands. It was dangerous work. Men had died for less than the trust I'd built with the indigenous peoples, but it was honest work, and in a territory where honesty was rarer than gold, that meant something. Thomas McKenna, Chief Standing Bear called, out in heavily accented English as his warriors formed a semicircle around my post. You have done my people a great service. I stepped outside, keeping my hands visible and my movements slow. Chief Standing Bear, what service do you speak of? 3 days ago, my youngest son, Little Wolf, was taken by Crow raiders while hunting near the Yellowstone. We tracked them to their camp, but he paused, his jaw tightening with barely controlled emotion. They had already sold him to white slavers heading east. My stomach clenched. The slave trade in Indian children was a brutal business that most decent folks pretended didn't exist. Young natives were captured and sold to work in mines or factories back east, their lives worth less than cattle to the men who trafficked in human misery. I heard about the raid, I said carefully, but I don't understand what this has to do with me. Standing Bear's lieutenant, a fierce-looking warrior called Red Hawk, spoke rapidly in Lakota. The chief nodded, then fixed me with his penetrating stare. Yesterday a wagon train stopped at your post. The trader, a man called Silas Crenshaw, had my son chained in the back of his wagon like an animal. Standing Bear's voice remained level, but I could see the fury burning in his dark eyes. You could have looked the other way. You could have taken their money and let them pass. Instead, the memory came flooding back. I'd been restocking supplies. When Crenshaw's wagon train had rolled up, 6 heavily armed men escorting 3 covered wagons. Something about them had set my teeth on edge, the way they kept looking over their shoulders, the nervous energy that spoke of men carrying guilty secrets. When I'd heard the crying coming from the 3rd wagon, I'd insisted on inspecting their cargo. Crenshaw had tried to refuse, claiming it was just sick livestock, but I'd pressed the issue. What I'd found had made my blood boil. 7 Indian children, ranging in age from perhaps 8 to 15, chained and terrified. I couldn't let them take those children, I said simply. You freed them all, Standing Bear continued. You gave them food, water, and horses to return home. You sent Crenshaw and his men away empty-handed, knowing they would spread word of your interference. It was the right thing to do. The right thing. Standing Bear repeated the words as if tasting them. Yes, but it was also dangerous. Crenshaw has powerful friends in the territorial government. Your actions will have consequences. I shrugged. I've faced consequences before. The chief studied me for a long moment, then gestured to one of his warriors. The man rode forward leading, a magnificent paint horse, but it wasn't the horse that made my breath catch. It was the rider. She was perhaps 18, with the kind of natural beauty that made men forget their own names. Her long black hair was adorned with eagle feathers and silver ornaments, and her buckskin dress was decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of high status within the tribe. But it was her eyes that held me captive. Dark as midnight and filled with an intelligence that seemed to see straight through to a man's soul. This is my daughter, Ayanna, Standing Bear said, his voice heavy with meaning. Her name means eternal blossom, and she is the most precious thing in my world. Ayanna dismounted with fluid grace, her gaze never leaving my face. When she spoke, her English was flawless, tinged with only the slightest accent. My father wishes to honor you for saving my brother's life, she said, her voice like music. In our tradition, such a debt can only be repaid with the greatest gift we can offer. My mouth went dry as I began to understand what was happening. Standing Bear stepped forward, his expression grave. Thomas McKenna, I offer you my daughter's hand in marriage. She will be your wife, your companion, your bridge between our worlds. Through her you will become family to the Lakota people. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of every warrior's gaze, could sense the magnitude of what was being offered. In their culture, this was the highest honor imaginable, the chief's daughter given freely to cement an alliance and repay a debt of honor. But as I looked into Ayanna's beautiful face, I saw something that made my heart ache. Behind the composed mask, behind the dutiful acceptance of her father's decision, I glimpsed a flash of something else. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. This wasn't her choice. She was being given away like a prize, her own desires irrelevant to the politics of gratitude and alliance. Chief Standing Bear, I said slowly, choosing my words with infinite care, I am deeply honored by your offer. Your daughter is beautiful beyond words, and any man would be blessed to call her wife. Hope flickered in the chief's eyes. But I wasn't finished. However, I cannot accept this gift. The reaction was immediate and electric. Warriors shifted in their saddles, hands moving to weapons. Red Hawk's face darkened with anger, and he spoke sharply in Lakota. But it was Ayanna's reaction that mattered most. The flash of surprise in her dark eyes followed by something that might have been relief. You refuse my daughter? Standing Bear's voice was dangerously quiet. I refuse to accept a woman as payment for doing what any decent man should do, I said firmly. Your daughter is not a commodity to be traded. She's a person with her own thoughts, her own dreams, her own right to choose her path in life. The chief's face had gone stone cold. You insult my family. You insult my people's traditions. I mean no insult. I'm trying to show respect for your daughter, for the concept of choice, for the idea that gratitude shouldn't require sacrifice from those who had no say in the matter. Standing Bear was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. You have made your choice, Thomas McKenna. Now you must live with the consequences. As the war party wheeled their horses and rode away, taking Ayanna with them, I felt a mixture of relief and regret. I'd done the right thing. I was sure of that. But as I watched them disappear into the vast Montana landscape, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. That night, as darkness fell across the prairie like a shroud, I would learn just how right I was. I should have known they would come in the darkness. The first sign was the horses. My two mares, usually calm as church mice, began stamping and snorting in their makeshift corral behind the trading post. Then the dogs, 3 mongrels I'd been feeding scraps to for months, started whimpering and slinking toward the cabin with their tails between their legs. Animals know things we don't. They can sense danger long before human senses catch wind of it. I was cleaning my rifle by lamplight when the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. The flame in my oil lamp flickered despite the absence of any wind, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up like I'd been struck by lightning. That's when I heard it, or rather, didn't hear it. The complete and utter absence of sound that comes when predators move through the night. No crickets chirping, no owls calling, no rustle of wind through the grass. Just silence so profound it felt like being buried alive. I extinguished the lamp and moved to the window, peering through, a crack in the shutters. At first I saw nothing but darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I began to make out shapes that shouldn't have been there. Shadows that moved with purpose, forms that materialized from the prairie grass like phantoms. They came from all directions, emerging from the earth itself, it seemed. Lakota warriors, their faces painted for war, their movements so silent they might have been spirits. I counted 20, then 30, then gave up counting as more kept appearing from the darkness. 100 warriors, maybe more. All of them, surrounding my cabin in a perfect circle, close enough that I could have thrown a stone and hit any one of them. yet so still they might have been carved from stone. My mouth went dry as I realized the magnitude of what I was facing. This wasn't a raiding party or a war band. This was an entire military force deployed with the precision of a chess master moving pieces into position. And I was the king, trapped in the center of the board with nowhere to run. I checked my weapons. The Winchester, a Colt 45, and a shotgun I kept for close work. Enough firepower to take down maybe a dozen men before they overwhelmed me. Against 100 Lakota warriors, I might as well have been armed with harsh language and good intentions. Hours passed. The warriors didn't move, didn't speak, didn't so much as shift their weight. They simply waited, their presence a constant reminder that my life hung by a thread thinner than spider silk. I found myself wondering if this was how it would end. Surrounded, outnumbered, dying alone in a cabin that had been my sanctuary for 5 years. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky the color of fresh blood, I heard the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders emerged from the morning mist, and my heart sank as I recognized them. Chief Standing Bear rode in the center, flanked by Red Hawk and another warrior I didn't know. But it was the 4th figure that made my breath catch in my throat. Ayanna rode behind her father, but something was different about her. Gone was the resigned acceptance I'd seen in her eyes the day before. Now she sat straight and proud, her dark eyes blazing with determination. She wore traditional war paint, red and black stripes across her cheekbones, and carried herself like a warrior rather than a prize to be bartered. Standing Bear dismounted and walked toward my cabin, his footsteps the only sound in the eerie silence. When he spoke, his voice carried across the prairie like thunder. "Thomas McKenna, come out and face what you have brought upon yourself." I took a deep breath, checked my pistol one last time, and opened the cabin door. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. It seemed like a beautiful day to die. "I'm here, Chief," I called out, stepping onto the porch with my hands visible but ready to draw if necessary. Standing Bear's weathered face was unreadable as he studied me. "You refused my gift. You insulted my daughter and my people's ways. For this the council has decreed that you must face judgment." "What kind of judgment?" "Trial by combat," Red Hawk interjected, his voice dripping with anticipation. "You will fight our greatest warrior. If you win, you are free to go. If you lose..." He shrugged eloquently. "And if I refuse?" Standing Bear gestured to the circle of warriors surrounding us. "Then you die here and now, like a rabbit caught in a snare." I was about to accept the challenge. What choice did I have? When Ayanna suddenly spoke up, her voice clear and strong in the morning air. "Father, I invoke the right of substitution." The effect of her words was immediate and electric. Standing Bear's eyes widened in shock. Red Hawk cursed in Lakota, and even the silent warriors shifted restlessly. Whatever she had just said, it had changed everything. "Daughter, you cannot..." "I can and I do," Ayanna said firmly, dismounting and walking toward us with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. "This man refused to accept me as payment for a debt. He said I had the right to choose my own path. Now I choose to stand in his place." She stopped directly in front of me, so close I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, meant for my ears alone. "You gave me back my freedom yesterday, Thomas McKenna. Today I give you back your life." The silence that followed Ayanna's declaration stretched like a bowstring drawn to its breaking point. I could see the shock rippling through the circle of warriors, their painted faces reflecting disbelief at what they had just witnessed. In all their traditions, in all their stories passed down through generations, no chief's daughter had ever invoked the right of substitution for a white man. "Ayanna, no," I said, stepping toward her. "I won't let you fight in my place." Her dark eyes flashed with something fierce and untamed. "You think because I am a woman I cannot fight? You think because I am the chief's daughter I am weak? That's not what I..." "Then you know nothing of Lakota women," she interrupted, her voice carrying across the prairie like a war cry. "We are the mothers of warriors, the daughters of chiefs, the sisters of braves. We do not cower behind men when honor demands action." Standing Bear's face had gone ashen. "Daughter, this is madness. You cannot..." "I can, father, and our laws. Support me." Ayanna's voice was steady as stone. "The right of substitution is sacred. When one person stands for another in trial by combat, the spirits themselves bear witness. You cannot deny what our ancestors have written in blood and tradition. Red Hawk stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with rage. This is an abomination. She seeks to protect this white dog who insulted our people. I seek to protect a man who showed me respect when my own people would trade me like a horse. Ayanna shot back, her words cutting through the morning air like a blade. He refused to accept me as payment because he believed I had value beyond my usefulness to men. For that alone, he deserves to live. The chief looked between his daughter and me, his weathered features etched with pain. You would risk your life for this stranger? I would risk my life for the principle he represents, Ayanna replied. The idea that a woman's worth is not measured by her obedience, but by her choices. Standing Bear closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, I saw the resignation of a father who knew his daughter's mind was made up. Very well, but if you invoke substitution, you must face our greatest warrior. You must face me, Red Hawk said, stepping into the circle with predatory grace. I claim the right of combat. My blood turned to ice. Red Hawk was a legend among the Lakota, a warrior who had counted coup on dozens of enemies, who had never lost a fight, who moved with the deadly precision of a striking rattlesnake. Against him, even a trained warrior would have little chance. Against him, Ayanna. No, I said, moving to stand between them. I won't allow this. You have no say in the matter, Red Hawk snarled. The woman has made her choice. Now she must live or die with the consequences. Ayanna placed her hand on my arm, her touch gentle but firm. Thomas, you must trust me. I am not the helpless maiden you think I am. I never thought you were helpless. But Red Hawk is. A man, she finished. Just a man. And men can be beaten. She walked to her horse and retrieved something from her saddlebags. A war club made from polished oak, its head wrapped in leather and studded with iron spikes. The weapon looked ancient, passed down through generations of warriors. This belonged to my great-grandmother, White Dove, Ayanna said, testing the club's weight in her hands. She killed 7 Crow warriors with it when they tried to steal her children. Her spirit lives in this wood, and today it will guide my hand. Red Hawk drew his own weapon, a tomahawk with a steel blade that gleamed like silver in the morning light. Pretty words, little dove, but words will not save you when steel meets flesh. The two combatants faced each other in the center of the circle, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. This was wrong. All wrong. Ayanna shouldn't be fighting my battles, shouldn't be risking her life for a principle I had forced upon her. But as I watched her settle into a fighting stance, I began to see something I had missed before. This wasn't just about protecting me. This was about her own freedom, her own right to choose her destiny. By invoking substitution, she had claimed agency over her own life in a way that no Lakota woman had ever done before. Begin. Standing, Bear commanded, his voice heavy with sorrow. Red Hawk attacked immediately, his tomahawk whistling through the air in a vicious arc aimed at Ayanna's head. But she wasn't there when the blade arrived. She had flowed aside like water, her war club coming up to deflect the strike with a ringing clash of metal on wood. The battle was joined, and I realized with growing amazement that Ayanna was not just surviving. She was holding her own. Her movements were fluid as a dancer's, economical as a surgeon's, deadly as a striking snake's. She had been trained by masters, I realized, taught the warrior's art in secret despite her gender. But Red Hawk was no ordinary opponent. He pressed his attack with relentless fury, his tomahawk weaving patterns of death in the morning air. Ayanna gave ground, her breathing becoming labored as she fought to stay ahead of his blade. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, Red Hawk's tomahawk caught her war club at the wrong angle, sending it spinning from her hands. She stumbled backward, defenseless, as the Lakota warrior raised his weapon for the killing blow. "Ayanna!" I screamed, starting forward. But she wasn't finished. As Red Hawk's tomahawk descended, Ayanna did something that defied belief. She stepped into the attack, catching his wrist with both hands and using his own momentum to throw him over her shoulder, in a move that would have made a wrestling master proud. Red Hawk hit the ground hard, his tomahawk flying from his grasp. Before he could recover, Ayanna had retrieved her war club and stood over him, the spiked head pressed against his throat. "Yield," she said quietly. Red Hawk looked up at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "I yield." The circle of warriors erupted in cheers and war cries, their voices echoing across the prairie like thunder. Ayanna had done the impossible. She had defeated the greatest warrior of the Lakota in single combat. But as she helped Red Hawk to his feet, I realized that the real victory wasn't in the fight itself. It was in what the fight represented, a woman claiming her right to choose, to fight, to determine her own destiny. Standing Bear approached, his daughter, his face shining with pride. "You have brought great honor to our people, Ayanna. You have shown that the spirit of the warrior knows no boundaries of gender." Ayanna nodded, then turned to face me. "The debt is paid, Thomas McKenna. You are free to go." But as I looked into her eyes, I realized that freedom was the last thing I wanted. This remarkable woman had risked everything for a principle, had fought like a demon to protect a stranger's life. How could I simply walk away from someone like that? "What if I don't want to go?" I asked. Her eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I want to stay? What if I want to court you properly, to win your heart the way a man should, through respect, through patience, through proving myself worthy of your love?" A smile spread across Ayanna's face like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then you would have to ask my father's permission." I turned to Standing Bear, my heart pounding with hope and terror. "Chief, I formally request permission to court your daughter, not as payment for a debt, not as a political alliance, but as a man who has fallen in love with the most remarkable woman he has ever met." Standing Bear looked between us, then threw back his head and laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the prairie. "Thomas McKenna," he said, "I think that can be arranged." 6 months later, I stood at the edge of the same prairie where 100 warriors had once surrounded my cabin. But this time the gathering was one of celebration rather than judgment. The entire Lakota tribe had assembled for what would become the most talked-about wedding in Montana Territory, the union of a white trader and the chief's daughter, who had redefined what it meant to be a warrior. Ayanna emerged from her father's lodge wearing a dress of white doeskin adorned with thousands of tiny beads that caught the afternoon sunlight like captured stars. Eagle feathers adorned her long black hair, and around her neck hung a necklace of silver and turquoise that had belonged to her grandmother. She was breathtaking, but it was the confidence in her bearing that truly took my breath away. "You clean up pretty well for a white man," she said with a smile that could have melted winter snow. "You're not so bad yourself for a woman who nearly killed Red Hawk with her bare hands," I replied, earning a laugh from the assembled crowd. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditions, Lakota customs honoring the joining of two spirits, combined with Christian elements that Father Martinez had insisted upon when he'd ridden out from the nearest settlement to officiate. Standing Bear had initially been skeptical of the priest's presence, but Ayanna had convinced him that their union should honor both worlds they would be bridging. As we exchanged vows in both English and Lakota, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning when I'd refused to accept Ayanna as payment for a debt. What had begun as a stand for principle had evolved into something far more precious, a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition that true partnership required choice, not obligation. "Do you, Thomas McKenna, promise to honor Ayanna not as a possession, but as an equal partner in all things?" Father Martinez asked. "I do," I said, looking into her dark eyes. "I promise to respect her strength, support her dreams, and never forget that she chose to be here of her own free will." "And do you, Ayanna, daughter of Standing Bear, promise to stand beside this man as his wife and partner?" "I do," she replied, her voice carrying across the prairie like a song. "I choose him as he chose to respect my right to choose." As we kissed to seal our union, the assembled crowd erupted in celebration. Warriors fired rifles into the air, women sang traditional songs, and children danced around the ceremonial fire that would burn until dawn. Red Hawk approached us during the feast, his scarred face creased in what might have been a smile. "You fought well that day, Ayanna. You taught this old warrior that strength comes in many forms, and you taught me that honor can be found even in defeat," she replied, clasping his hand in friendship. Later, as the celebration continued around us, Ayanna and I walked to the banks of the nearby stream, where we had first talked about our future together. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Giving up the traditional path your father had planned for you?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow past in the moonlight. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "You gave me the gift of choice, Thomas. You showed me that my worth wasn't determined by my usefulness to others, but by my own actions and decisions. And what do you choose now?" She turned to face me, her eyes shining with love and determination. "I choose to build something new, with you. A life that honors both our peoples, a partnership that proves love is stronger than tradition, and a future where our children will know they have the right to choose their own destinies. As we kissed under the Montana stars, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and the promise of tomorrow, I realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come not from what we're given, but from what we're brave enough to give back. Ayana had been offered to me as payment for a debt, but she had become something far more valuable, a partner, an equal, and the love of my life. And it had all begun with a simple principle, that every person, regardless of gender or station, deserves the right to choose their own path. In the end, that choice had led us both home.